Episode is sponsored by Myler Management Group. Myler Management Group is a professional service that handles the day-to-day operations of real estate properties on behalf of property owners. They oversee tasks such as tenant sourcing, rent collection, property maintenance, and lease agreements. The group ensures properties are well maintained, tenants are satisfied, and the owner's investment is managed effectively. Their goal is to maximize property value while minimizing the stress and the workload for the owner. Welcome to the 1334 podcast. My name is Blake Barlow, and today I'm joined by Josh Copron. He's the lead pastor at Grace City Church in Albany, Georgia. He's an author and leader. How are you?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
First time on the podcast.
Yeah. Hopefully not the last.
Yes.
Maybe I won't screw it up too bad. So I have an icebreaker. I've been trying to figure out the format for these. And so I was like, well, let's just start this one with an icebreaker and see how it goes.
All right.
What's a skill you're absolutely terrible at but wish you could magically master?
Music, guitar. I wish
Really?
I could play. When I do college, I had to take like an elective course. So I was like, man, why not like something useful? So I took a guitar class because I just wanted to be able to like jam out on some worship songs, but it was like guitar notes. It was terrible. My fingers hurt. And so after a full semester, I was no better at the guitar. I was absolutely terrible. So I wish that I was either a musician or could sing, because like most pastors, they'll like come up, close out worship, and they'll like just start like singing.
In the middle of it?
Yeah, in the middle of it. They have those skills. I don't. I got one skill, and that's it. I talk. Yes.
I can't believe how fast you answered that. You were ready for that one. So today I just want to go through like your new book, Path to Purpose. After listening to your message series, I knew how much this could relate to nonprofits and then really just other leaders. Whether you're Christian or not, I feel like these principles, the same way Proverbs applies to everyone, whether you're Christian or not, I feel like this is great wisdom that should be shared. And so I figured, why not have you on, talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, that's great.
What inspired Path to Purpose?
Well, it's actually the second book, so another book plug. The first book I wrote on purpose is called Discover Purpose. Just really wanted to help people find the thing that they felt like their purpose, their reason for being, the thing that God had called them to do. And so that one was really more about helping you discover what that thing is. And then I ran into a bunch of people who they kind of felt like they knew they had an idea about what God had called them to do, but they just had no idea how to get started. Or I saw a lot of people who found out what that purpose is, ran headlong after that thing, but then they ran into obstacles and challenges and things, and they ended up quitting, and so they've since started 9 different businesses, everything is continually changing, and they always run into the same obstacles and quit and reinventing themselves and going in a new direction. So just wanted to kind of give somebody a practical blueprint of some things to look for and to help them, get moving in that direction, and some things that everybody encounters as they're seeking to walk out their purpose. Because I think when you hear that, other people have experienced that same thing, it lets you know that, hey, I am doing the right thing. I am going in the right direction because I'm not the only one who's experienced this. And
that really ties in perfectly for what this podcast is for. Like, honestly, I want to say between me and you, but I'm recording this. I didn't want to do a podcast. It was like one of the last things I wanted to do. I didn't want to be on camera. I didn't want to talk to people. I just want to make videos and edit and try and help people.
Yeah.
But I really kept feeling a pull, like, you have to start a podcast. You have to start. And then, now after a few episodes, like, our YouTube's growing, like, our social media is growing, everything's growing tremendously, and we're actually helping share other people's story. But, it's just like with anything, any nonprofit, any leadership, any entrepreneurship, like, it's just obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And it's just like, I don't know, I feel like maybe it relates to everyone, but it's like you have a drive to do one thing, and then that's how I am with 1334. Like, if I do this forever part-time, that's fine, like, this is just part of the journey, and we have problem after problem, and it's just not
Yeah, but I think you said something that was great, is that you talked about how you didn't want to do this, but you kept feeling like you had this leading to do it, and then you did it, and now it's caused all these other things that you've been working on for a long time to start growing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's one of the things, is like you feel like, man, this is like another, tangent. This is kind of like off mission, off brand, but you know what? Hey, I'm going to do this anyways. And that ends up being the thing that causes these other things to grow.
Yeah.
So many times we stay stuck. We keep doing the same thing, day in and day out, expecting things to be different, expecting things to change. But you have to do different things. You have to try new things and see if they work. And experimentation is a huge part in the path to purpose, is just trying things out and seeing if they work, or they might flop and fail, and nothing ever comes of it, but at least you tried.
How long would you try?
Ooh, I guess it would also be, how much money does it cost? To experiment.
Yeah.
So, is this just like time costs? To where I have the equipment, you got the lights, you got the cameras, you got the mics, you have that stuff, and so it's just the time now that you invest in it. But it's tough to know when to let something go because it's not working, and when to pick it up. I wish that was like an easy answer, I think there is times when it's just like, okay, I need to let this thing go because it's not producing the results that I'm wanting it to, and the time I'm putting into it versus what it's actually generating. Sometimes it's time to switch gears and try some new things.
So how do you avoid waiting for those perfect circumstances? Like, for me, like, I had the equipment, but I don't know, maybe it's personality type. I just didn't wait. I just started. I found Farmer Fredo, and I knew the guy talks, and he talks really well. And I was like, hey man, you free in about 2 weeks? But how would you recommend someone avoid like waiting for the perfect time? Like, I think parents do the same thing. Like, oh, I'll have the second kid when I'm ready. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, how do you try to avoid those perfect circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's when you come to the realization that if you wait for the perfect circumstances, you'll be waiting forever, because they're never going to come. You're never going to attract the resources, the people, the team, the momentum you need sitting still. And so there's never just going to come some moment where it's like, all right. And I know that better than anybody, because God spoke to me about, writing books a decade before I wrote a book. And so like, it was one of the it was the clearest encounter with God I had, where he spoke to me. I heard his voice. It was as close to like the audible voice of God, like inner audible, that I've ever come to. And he said, you're going to write a book. And it's one of those things I knew was God, because I have no desire to write at all. But I knew it was God. And then, 10 years later, I thought, I think it was like I was waiting for just the perfect time to start writing, to start doing something. And I realized that time is the only time I got. So I need to do something now. And so I think when you realize that there's never going to be the perfect time, you just have to start moving.
Yeah.
And as you get moving, you get going in that direction. That's when, God brought editors and things into my life to help, me with my English, my grammar, and all those things. But they didn't come while I was just sitting there. It was like I finished a manuscript, and I was like, hey, I need somebody. And someone said, oh, my son actually does that, and he's actually a great editor. And so I was able to hand it to him, who handed it to somebody else. And next thing you know, it became, something. But I didn't make those connections until, I actually started moving and started doing something.
Well, how would you say that if you waited a decade, how would you recommend someone avoid like not stepping out because of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think that there's two kinds of regret. There are regrets of action, and there are regrets of inaction, and so, there's always going to be an element of uncertainty. There's always going to be like, I don't know if this is going to work out. But I think when we look back at the end of our lives, for most people, I think there are some people that their biggest regrets are things that they've done, especially people in prison, people, that are in jail right now. It's like, yeah, it's this thing that I did. But
Yeah.
I think for the average person, when they reach the end of their life, their greatest regrets aren't about necessarily the things that they've done, but the things that they didn't do. You know, those things that they felt like, those dreams they had in their heart to start that business, to launch that nonprofit, to do something, and then they just stayed in their comfort zone and didn't do anything. And so I think even if you launch out and fail miserably at it, it's better than just sitting around wondering, what if I would have had the courage to do something? You know, a good friend of mine felt like, you know, there was this thing that God had put on his heart to do, felt like he was called to do this. And so he launched out, did it, invested tons of money, which I don't recommend doing that at the first hand, invested tons of money, tons of time in this thing. And it ended up flopping massively. It was a complete failure. He lost thousands of dollars in the process, and the thing just ended up, you know, being the biggest flop that he'd ever done. But I don't think it's even a failure, though, because at least you could say, hey, man, I went for it. I gave it everything that I had. You know, now there are some wisdom that he could have learned along the way before he invested, you know, thousands of dollars and all those things into those things. And so that's where, you know, we want to take calculated risks. You know, there's always going to be an element of trust. There's going to be an element of risk, but we want to take calculated risks. You know, there's a biblical principle that I think can apply to any business, any endeavor that you do. And it's found in Genesis chapter 1, where the first command that God gave to mankind was be fruitful and multiply. And the fruitfulness comes before the multiplication. So you have to learn the fruitful stage before you start to multiply it. And so where my friend messed up is that he had an idea and he went into the multiplication, the distribution of a product that was untested, and there was no market for it.
Yeah.
You know, to where there's other ways that you could have accomplished that and known whether or not there's actually a market for this thing you're wanting to do. That were a lot cheaper. That, you know, he could have sunk, you know, $200 into it instead of a couple $1,000 into this thing. And so that's where, you know, I tell people, just step out and start doing it, and then you can learn. And once you get something that's fruitful, that's, hey, this is working, there's a need for this, there's a demand for this, you know, people are drawn to this thing. Well, now we move into the multiplication phase. You know, how do we take this thing that I'm passionate about, this thing that I love to do, and now multiply its reach, multiply its production, you know, and then you begin to scale it. But a lot of people, they want to jump to the finished product and to begin to multiply something that was never fruitful to begin with. And so that's where I say, get out there, start doing it, embrace the uncertainty, take a risk, calculated one, invest a small amount in it. And if it flops, you know, you're out a few $100, but, you know, in some time, but at least you've done it versus, I wonder what would have happened if I had done that.
I have never thought of that verse like that. That's cool. And it made me think of, do you know what T-Rex Arms is?
Yeah, I know. Like, I know what T-Rex arms are.
It's a company that makes holsters.
Okay, I didn't know that, but
so he's the guy that started it. He was like 16 or 17 at the time, and he just went to his parents' garage and started making holsters and designing a product that he liked. And then he just started. He would take the money he got from selling them to buy ammo, and then he just started shooting, and then he would do competition shoots, and he would just film himself shooting as fast as he could. And then he had a YouTube channel that just grew and grew and grew, and then he started selling more holsters. And he built this giant company that has over 100 employees and stuff now. He's like 28, 29. Built this huge company completely debt-free because he did that. He saw that it was fruitful, and then he started to scale it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a brilliant idea. And they started expanding and adding the YouTube channel and these other things that he started doing. And so that's a lesson that I wish I would have known a long time ago. But it's one that I'm still, you know, currently learning.
Yeah. he was on, I think it was Dave Ramsey's podcast talking about it. It was really interesting to hear his business mind, because I'm about the same age and I'm trying to build something too. So it was really cool to, super inspirational for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Even though it's a incredibly interesting company.
Different niche, man. That's where it's like, hey, there are people who are interested in this. Like, you never know until you actually do it. I don't know, people are interested in custom gun holsters for T-Rex arms, you know? But, you don't know until you actually try and go, oh, well, there's actually a huge market for this thing, or this is a niche that nobody else is doing.
So how would you recommend someone find their next step? Like, I think it's really easy to have, like, paralysis when it comes to this sort of thing. Whether it's you have, like, 400 ideas and hundreds of things you can do, but how would you recommend someone take that very first step? I know you say just go, but what is that first step? What's that go? Like, how do you identify exactly what the first step you should take is?
I think as long as you're taking a general step in the direction of your purpose, any movement forward is good movement, even if you find out, all right, hey, this is not the thing that I want to do, that any step is just in that direction is going to be beneficial in the long run. Because that's the thing, you talked about the, paralysis of analysis, which is like, there's so many things that I could do. There's so many, directions that I could go in. And so you feel overwhelmed because you don't know which direction, to go. And so, like, same thing with, like, okay, so take book writing, for example. You feel like God's called you to write a book. Well, the first step is just to start writing, to get a manuscript, and then you could hand it to somebody and they could say, this is trash, which is what happened with my first manuscript. They're like, this is terrible. This doesn't resemble a book. This is like a bad book report, That's what it looked like. And so, go back to the drawing board, and I was able to, rehash that and rework it and stuff like that. But you had to move a step in that direction. And so whatever that thing is, if you feel like it's, it's a podcast or a YouTube channel, and this is like my idea for it, man, just start uploading content. Don't wait until you get all the fancy stuff that you have here. Like, do it on your phone and see if it generates any traction, and just start moving. And you go, you know what? Actually, I don't want to do a YouTube channel where it's just me. In fact, I think I'm a better conversationalist than I am talking to a camera. And so maybe I just, I bring somebody else in, and don't be afraid to experiment and to try, new things, because, sometimes that's that key to innovation, is when you don't have a budget or all these other things. And so you really have some freedom to innovate and to do things, differently. And so it's like, if you have like a big target that you want to reach to, just start taking those small steps towards that thing. Even if it's just, all right, hey, I want to start this business. Well, go interview somebody who's actually in that field, who's actually done that, and learn from, their mistakes, learn from their wisdom. And so even just small things like that can help you, versus you just trying to figure out, all on your own.
Yeah. That's what I've had people ask me, like, hey, I want to start doing videos for this, but how do I do it? I said, what kind of phone do you have? Like, your phone camera's fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to shoot 4K and all these fancy things. I said, go to a window around lunch and film with your phone. It's perfectly fine. Like, I started everything I do now with a really cheap camera and cheap lenses, and I just figured it out.
Yeah.
You don't need anything fancy. You just figure it out.
Yeah. I remember you told me that same advice when I was doing, the YouTube stuff. You're like, dude, you don't need all these, fancy lights. I think I had some, like, $50 newer set, and just, opened up the blinds and started filming, with my phone. And it's,
It worked, didn't it?
Yeah, it worked, And so, we think we have to get all these other things before we do anything. And so that's where I just say, man, just get moving, just start heading in that direction. And then you might get in that direction and go, you know what, this was like an idea that I had. This is something I thought that would be cool, but this actually sucks and I hate it.
Yep.
And that's okay. So now you've crossed off one thing off your list that okay, I don't want to move in that direction. It's like people who are like, all right, man, it's kind of sucks the way our education system is lined up, because it's like, all right, I want to go be a teacher, but then it's a really long time before you actually are in a classroom with kids.
Yeah.
Let's get them in the classroom in the first semester of school.
See if you actually like it.
See if you actually like it. Because so many people get in there and like, this is terrible. Tell them what they're going to get paid.
Yeah.
And then put them in a room with kids and be like, is this worth it for virtually nothing? And they're like, you know what? No, I'd rather make money and not wipe snotty noses all day. It would help a lot of people out.
Yep.
Or, versus like this whole thing of where you just go and you learn all this information before you actually do anything.
Yeah.
So, there's like the saying like, ready, aim, fire. I just fire, ready, aim.
Yeah.
And just shoot and figure it out later, but just do something instead of sitting around and trying to wait for everything to line up perfectly.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to. I heard someone say something along the lines of, you say an idea and it feels like you did it. Like someone says, oh, I'm going to start going to the gym. And then they feel good about it.
Yeah.
And then they don't go to the gym.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like when I was starting this podcast, I didn't tell anybody. I told my wife and I told my board, and that was it. And then I just started. And I know I'll end up learning and growing along the way. I'm pretty sure the last podcast I did is not very good. The guy's great, super interesting guy, but I tried something new and I added music to it.
Yeah.
And I had some feedback that was like, oh, I understand what you're doing. And then one of my board members was like, wasn't great. So It's like I can start adapting that a little bit and add music here or there and try it, or just cut it out completely and try again.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Do you think it's more of a personality type, or do you think it's just willingness to fail? What do you think it is that causes someone to be okay with sucking?
Yeah. I think what you were saying with, that people, if they have an idea, they act as though they've done it.
Yeah.
Like I got a family member who's like the biggest evangelist for like keto carnivore, but they don't do it.
Really?
Yeah, they eat like generally like somewhere in the vicinity of that, but then they're having carbs, they're having sugar, they're doing all these things, and they're telling other people to do it. They're telling people that it'll cure whatever ailments you have wrong with you. It's the cure all for everything. But I'm like, but you don't actually do it. And so I think there is something about having the information and how we're sometimes content knowing the right things instead of actually doing anything with it. But it's like in the end, the goal, and when we stand before Jesus, we want to hear him say the words, well done, good and faithful servant. It's not going to be well thought, well planned.
Well, almost.
Yeah, almost. Like, man, that vision board was awesome. Like, man, you really put it together, great vision board. But it's like, well, did you do anything on the board? And so I think that's where, and sometimes I think it lights a fire when you actually see somebody else living the dream and doing what God's called you to do.
Yeah.
So when you see somebody else that, stepped out and did that idea, and you're like, man, I could have done that.
Yeah.
There's a Christian filmmaker. He does documentary style videos and wildly popular. He always talks about how, God asked him to do it. He's like, God, I don't know enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. And God's like, I know you weren't my first choice. And he was like, what? And I could be getting the number slightly wrong here, but I think God said something like, you're the 11th person I asked to do this. And so he wasn't even like God's top three. He was number 11.
Not even top 10.
Yeah, because he didn't know how to do like the video and the editing. And he's like, dude, I don't even do this stuff. And so he had to like learn all of it, but he just decided to say, yes to God. And so I can't imagine what it's like to see the other 10 people that God asked to do that thing see what he's doing and go, oh my gosh, I had that same idea. God spoke to me about that, and now this guy's living my dream and what I'm supposed to do. And to me, that's haunting.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what drove me to do this, because I was like, in 2018, I went to India and I filmed with Andy, who was running a Christian orphanage in India, very hidden. He didn't tell anybody where he was, super persecuted place. And I was like, I mean, I'll go try to tell your story. Why not? And then it just sparked a fire in me to help as many people as I could, because this guy was flying back to the U.S. and driving around for 3 months every year away from his family, away from his kids, and was just trying to fundraise. And I was like, if you could do this online and really tell your story, how much more time could you spend with your family, you know?
Yeah.
And it just sparked this whole thing. And now we just came back from Thailand and did this whole documentary. And it's like, I know I'm moving in the right direction. Of course, I don't know. You know, I just felt peace to go to Thailand and film with Enoch. So this is what I did. Like, it's just step by step. This is the same thing, exactly what I'm trying to do with this. And I think that's what made me really want to talk to you about this, because I was like, this is exactly what I'm doing. Like,
yeah, and you're doing it though. You're like living it. Because I remember you sent that post out. You're like, hey, tell me about a nonprofit. Somebody's doing something that, you know, I can use my skills to help. And I think I mentioned, you know, Enoch and what they're doing in Thailand. And I mean, there were you know, probably 20 different submissions at least on that post.
Yeah.
But then you just felt like that's the one.
Yep.
You know? And so, you know, that's what I tell people, man, follow that peace, follow that thing that sparks joy, that gets excitement, even though it's like, that's a pretty like big jump for you. I know you'd done the one in India, but then you traveling to Thailand, taking a team and doing that, like that's a huge step of faith, you know, a lot expensive.
Oh yeah.
You know, going to Thailand and doing all that stuff. But you just went for it, you know, and so kudos to you for, you know, stepping out and just going for it and not just, you know, waiting until you had everything. You didn't have the money to go. It's like, hey, we're going. Yeah. And then it's like, we're trying to raise money, you know, and then I talked to you, it was like just a couple weeks before you guys left. You're like, man, I got everything but, you know, the money for the hotels. And I was like, well, we'll help out with that, you know, and the money, the people, all that stuff came, but it came after you made that commitment to do that thing. And so, and I think that there's something to that. I think that's when, if you're, you know, a believer, you're a Christian, I think that's when God gets involved. He doesn't get involved with your planning per se. He gets involved when it's like, oh, this guy's serious about doing this. He's going to need my help. Yeah. You know, and it's your action that provokes God's involvement, you know, in your story and in what you're doing.
Yeah, we raised nearly $36,000 last year.
Wow.
And 9,000 of that was in 3 months trying to go to Thailand. It was mind-blowing. Like, we had no money for it. And then we just started posting on Facebook. We were like, somebody's got to help, right?
Yeah.
It was one of those things, like, I knew we were going. I didn't know when. I was like, maybe we'll go 2025. Like, whenever we get the money, we'll set a date, you know?
Yeah.
And then the board, so we started looking at it. We started looking at the prices after we said we were going. And we were like, well, we might only need 4,000. And then the tickets jumped. We're like, oh, we're going to need 7. And then tickets jumped. Oh, we're going to need 12. And the tickets jumped. And so we were like, okay, well, we're not bringing 5 people. We're not bringing 4. We're not bringing 3. And it was just me and Corey. We're like, this is all we have money for 2 of us.
Yeah.
But I mean, it turned out great. And we're still promoting the documentary and looking at other festivals to put it into.
Yeah. But it's great because like the you know, provision for it followed the vision. You know, some people want the provision to come before they you know, execute the vision, but it's like, no, it only comes, you know, as you're going.
What biblical principles from your book and this message series can nonprofit leaders apply to their mission work, whether they believe in the Bible or not? Like, because I believe books like Proverbs, whether you're Christian or not, has great wisdom in it to live by. Especially the first, 6 chapters of Proverbs. 7.
Yeah.
So what biblical principles can apply to other nonprofit leaders?
I think really the whole book, I think biblical principles work in every aspect of life, because they're founded in God's truth and God's reality, which transcends just the Christian space.
Yeah.
Even sometimes people might not be able to recognize them. Like there's a particular pastor who is friends with some of the guys on Shark Tank. And one of the guys, Damien, I think it is, and he was talking about something. This guy goes, man, that's like biblical. And so this guy was talking about how when you write your goals down, you're, whatever percentage more likely to fulfill them once you actually put them on paper. So that's what he teaches in his workshop. And this guy's like, man, that's from the Bible? He's like, no, it's not. He's like, yeah, Habakkuk, write the vision, make it plain so that those who read it may run with it. And he was like, man, I had no idea. And so he went through his entire talk that he gives, and he showed him how all these things are based on biblical principles, and he didn't know it. And so even if you don't know it's a biblical principle, it'll work. Sowing and reaping works for people who know the Lord and don't. And so like, hey, if you have a dream in your heart that you want to see happen and, you don't have the funding for it, man, I give into somebody else who's doing it, and then it comes back to me, And so I think all those principles apply. But I think one of the key things for any business, nonprofit, whatever you're doing, is the chapters on adversity, and how every single person who set out to do something for God, or just any person who set out to do anything, period, they were always met with resistance, regardless of how noble, beneficial, altruistic your purpose may be. There's going to be somebody who has a problem with it. So if you think, all right, I'm going to go, rescue children out of human trafficking in another nation, they're like, well, there's people here that need to be rescued. What about the people here? And it's like, yeah, there's people are going to do all of it, but I feel like I'm supposed to go over here and do this. So no matter what you do, there's going to be critics. There's going to be people who come against you. There's going to be people who say, we don't need another one of those. There's already somebody else doing that. We don't need another church. We don't need another nonprofit. We don't need another coffee shop. There's always going to be somebody who's trying to talk you, out of something. And that's one of the ways that, I think sometimes you're on the right track is that adversity and hardship and knowing that you need to persevere. Every single, incredible story, there was always that adversity. There was that moment where it's like, man, we almost shut everything down. Thankfully, we didn't. We almost gave up. We almost quit. We almost threw in the towel. But, hey, we hung in there, and so it's knowing that it's not going to be just easy. Even if you believe in God and you feel like God has really spoken to you about something, it doesn't mean that, because God told you to do this, that it's not going to be without challenges, without, you had to do, like I said, you had to use your entire budget, on, all these, because of inflation of a price of a ticket, how everything shot up. That was something completely outside of your control, but yet it impacted you. You didn't go, well, it's just too expensive, and so we'll just, we'll just go somewhere closer, go somewhere where we can drive. But you still persevered. You still, sacrificed and went.
You said that you still did the work, and it just immediately reminded me of in Genesis, the first thing Adam does is work. The very first thing he's called to do before anything else is work. And I think it's so easy to, especially in America, to feel entitled to be like, well, God said I'm going to get this, so I'm going to sit down and wait for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to just sit down and wait for something without realizing that if you don't get up and work, nothing happens.
That's right.
You need to miss sleep. You need to work harder. You need to spend your money a little bit wiser, eat out a little bit less, and just try to make stuff happen.
Yeah. Some people, expect, God to do it all, or somebody else to do it all, or, some benefactor to come along because they think you have a great idea and just, fund the whole thing. And that's awesome if you get that. Yeah. Fantastic. But that's most of the time that's not, how it is. There's a hustle and there's a grind to it, especially in the beginning, when you're trying to build something from the ground up, that there's going to be sacrifices. It's not going to be easy, even when God's in it. It doesn't mean it's going to be effortless.
And I think a lot of nonprofits end up struggling with like that daily grind, whether they are doing it full time, or I know there's a lot of people locally that work full-time jobs, and then every weekend they go out and they're serving their mission. They've created a nonprofit and they're doing what they can, or they're serving in churches or whatever it is, serving in rehab facilities, or there's a nonprofit called Open Arms here in Albany that they have people come in that just help. Open Arms does a lot for homeless and trafficked youth, and they have people just volunteer and come in and help on the weekends, and even if it's just clean up stuff,
Yeah.
But how would you recommend someone take those? I think it's really easy to lose the big vision when you're worried about, I got to go get gas for this van and help so-and-so do this. Like, how do you not get lost in the weeds, lost in the daily tasks?
Yeah, I think that's where the chapter in the book about, teamwork, where, you don't go as far as your dream, you go as far as your team in life. And so it's having a good, solid group of people around you who can help you execute that thing, And so I was listening to this guy who was talking about how he had a staff, people who were paid, so it doesn't, just apply to, volunteers.
Yeah.
But he said, I've delegated all of my weaknesses.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, man, that's brilliant, And so this guy was like, man, I don't like being the guy who like goes in the office and like drops the hammer on people. So I hired a guy who is that guy. He just goes around dropping the hammer, correcting, getting onto people when they misbehave. And so it's like, man, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I think it's bringing a team of people around you who can help you so that you can focus on that thing that makes you come alive, that thing that you love about what you do, because all those things need to get done.
Yeah.
The van has to be gassed up, the videos have to be edited, whatever that thing is. But for some people that brings them joy, that gives them life, that's purpose for somebody. And so what is a dreary for you to do that just brings you down, like, oh my gosh, I've been putting this off because I don't want to do it. Man, that makes somebody come alive, spreadsheets and administration. Some people get excited about that stuff. They're weird, they're nerdy, they're crazy, but they get excited about those things, like opening up, Excel and they love that stuff. And so I'm like, I let those people have at it, And so bringing those people around who can help do those things, because it brings them a sense of purpose that everybody is looking for. And not everybody is called to be, the head of an organization or a nonprofit, but they believe in the vision and the mission of what you're doing. And so they just want to come alongside and they want to volunteer a couple hours, out of their week and give of their time. And so those are huge because it allows you to do what only you can do as the leader of the organization and focus on those things that give you life. So that way you're not spending the bulk of your time doing the things that really break you down. Because if you do, then you just end up quitting because you're like, I hate this. I'm no longer doing what I love anymore because I'm doing all these things that I hate.
I think that solves. At the beginning, you were talking a lot about like adversity and overcoming obstacles. I think that's one of the biggest things people end up like doing, and the reason that they quit is because they started out to feed the homeless, but now they're putting gas in vans and they're buying groceries at Sam's and they're coordinating people to cook, and when all they want to do is help the homeless. And I think it's really easy to completely overlook, like, I have a vision that I want to make movies, but I forgot that I have to write, I have to produce, I have to direct, I have to fundraise, I have to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to have a big picture but still forget a lot of what goes on.
Yeah. Because you start operating outside of your gifting, and what your purpose and your gift mix and your skill set kind of go together. But when you're leading any organization, obviously the responsibilities on you, They go way outside of your skill set, especially the larger, you get, the more demands there are. And so that's where, you definitely have to have a team of solid people around you. Like as a pastor, my main focus is on, content creation, study, communication, in either teaching or writing, those are my biggest things. But there's a lot that goes into running a church. And so there's administration and there's, meetings with people and counseling people. And those aren't my sweet spot. Like if I have to counsel somebody for an hour, like I feel like drained,
Am I draining you?
No, this is not counseling. This is just talking about life.
It feels like counseling for me.
Yeah. But it drains me. We're counselors, like that's what they do every day, listen to people's like problems. And it's like, oh man, let me go get lost in a book. Let me go read. Let me go study. Let me nerd out on something. But other people, they have to be around people. Yep. That's where they come alive, is being around people. And so you want to, spend the bulk of your time doing what you love to do and delegate as much as you can to other people and bring them along in the journey.
How do you find those right people? How do you get connected with the right people that not only can do what you need, but are also going to really invest in your mission and vision?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, to be honest. I think sometimes I think it's finding people who believe in what you're doing and not allowing things that don't really matter for the sake of what you are trying to accomplish. Like there was an individual who was running a anti-human trafficking organization, and obviously this person was a Christian, and they had a board, but there was some people on the board who weren't Orthodox Christians. They might have some spirituality, some belief in God, but they weren't Christians. And so this person had one of their friends saying, hey, you need to get this person off of your board because they're not a Christian and they don't line up with your beliefs. And so they came and asked me about it, like, hey, do I need to get this person off my board? I said, well, do they believe in rescuing girls out of human trafficking? Yes. I said, do they possess a skill set that is needed? Do they bring wisdom to your board and your decision making that is valuable for the organization? And they said, yes. I said, who cares if they're a Christian?
Yeah.
Why would you put up boundaries where those don't need to be? As long as people can rally around what you're doing and believe in it, that's the only thing that needs to happen. Yep. And even outside of that, some people, they only want to be around people they like or people they're friends with.
Yep.
And like, man, we have staff at our church who, if it wasn't for being at the church, we probably wouldn't hang out. We just don't have a lot in common, outside of that. And that's okay. Like, we don't have to like the same music or the same foods or, have the same personalities. But like, you believe in what we're doing and you're a huge asset to this team. And so some people only want to surround themselves with people who are just like them. And it's okay if it's like, man, outside of the time where we're together doing this thing, we're probably not going to hang out much. Yep. And that's okay.
Yep.
You don't have to, be best friends with everybody that is on your team or helping you fulfill it for them to do it. And so don't draw lines and exclude people for, reasons you don't have to. Now when I'm hiring staff at a church, like, yes, you need to believe in God to do what we're doing. But, for most, nonprofit, you just have to believe in the vision, the mission. And we have people who serve in our church who don't really believe in God, and that's okay. Like, just get around us. You still believe that we're adding value to people. And they say, I can get behind that. I can, and some of them give financially to it as well, even though they're not bought into everything. And so don't look for reasons to exclude people. Look for reasons to include people and don't divide over differences that just don't matter.
Yeah. What do you think about, so I'm actually releasing a podcast I did with Darla Harms. She's a leadership coach. I know you know her personally. Mm-hmm. But she gave some really good advice for like setting up a board, which I know you have a little experience with, especially leadership, because you lead, 4,000 staff members, something like that?
Yeah, sure. That sounds good. That sounds good. I like that number. Let's go with it.
Actually, Corey told me to call you senior global pastor.
They made me a shirt that said that, senior global pastor. So that's the goal. That's the
Yeah.
dream, is one day I'll be the global guy just flying around on my jet to the different campuses. So if there's anybody watching that wants to donate a jet
That'd
to
be
the
legit.
ministry, I will use it.
Just to go to visit the
Just to
father's
go,
house.
yeah, or just to go get good food. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like, hey, there's this really good restaurant. Let's just go take the Falcon F-50 over there and get it.
So what do you think about people that are... So I actually had someone reach out to me yesterday. He said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a nonprofit. He said, my daughter's a type 1 diabetic, and I need to start a nonprofit. I feel like I need to start a nonprofit to create a community around these people and help with funding for other people that are going through what I am. And he was asking all sorts of questions like, how do I get a board? How do I do the paperwork? Like, and I was walking him through step by step, like some of the, hey, you need to get incorporated. Like, you need to do these small things first. But what advice would you give to someone that's looking at starting a board? Like, would you say, just go to your church and find your friends? Or like, do you have any like super practical advice for someone in that situation?
You know, I don't have a lot of experience in this, in that I inherited a board when I became the pastor of the church. I don't think I selected any of the individuals on that board myself. I'm very thankful for the board I inherited. But I think sometimes, you know, people start doing that before they actually start doing the mission.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think we should form boards around things that we're doing, not forming a board in order to do something.
Yeah.
You know, is like you just start doing it. You know, you want to get people together around a thing and build a community, just do it. And then once you get doing it, you'll find people who believe in what you're doing, and they'll come alongside and help. And then you can have those people actually form your board because they're actually contributing, you know, to it. They really believe in what you do. There are some people that just want to have a seat on a board, or they want to have input in how things are being run, and they haven't actually done anything with it. And so I think some people are just so quick to put, 18 people in, and I'd be slow to put people on a board.
Yeah.
I'd be very slow, because once you form a board and you put people on it, it's a lot harder to take people off. It's really easy to add them on. It's a lot hard to remove them when they can sometimes cause dissension and division. And I've seen people start, organizations only to get voted out of the organization that they founded,
Really?
By their board. And it's heartbreaking to see that happen. But I'm like, you selected those people before they were actually tested, before they were actually doing anything, and so find people who are already doing it, already bringing value, already believe in you and are helping you. And then you kind of, you make official what they're already doing.
Yeah.
It's kind of our same process, I guess. And I have more experience in this, is hiring people at the church. We don't hire people to do jobs. We want to hire people who are already doing the job.
Yeah.
We've made the mistake of hiring somebody who wasn't doing a job, thinking that if we hired them, they would do the job. And then we hired them and realized they can't do the job, or they suck at the job, or they don't even want to do it, versus saying, hey, this person's already doing this. If we could, pay you or do something in order for you to give more time to this, would you be interested in that? And so, like, you want to give more to the doers and not just the thinkers and the talkers. And those boards tend to attract those people.
Yeah.
People who want to sit and talk and theorize and plan, but they don't want to pick up a shovel.
Yep.
They want to put in the work. And I want workers around me, not just idea people,
That was the problem I actually had when I first started the board, because the board for 1334, because I was like, I just need people to help make sure I'm going in the right direction. And then I started and I was like, struggling to get everything done, and I was like, I really need people to actually do something.
Yeah.
And so I'm so thankful for Corey, because he's like doing things.
Yeah.
He's going to be recording podcasts for me, and he's going to be, in your message series you talked about the armor bearer, and that's kind of how Corey and I feel about each other. It's like, we need to do this, so we're just going to figure it out and keep moving, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think we're really headed in that direction of bringing on doers. And we're actually extending and going to have we're not a Christian organization, but the majority of us are Christians.
Yeah.
But we're going to bring on like a prayer team and really, because I believe, I personally believe that, the only way to do anything is pray about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to bring on a whole prayer team to pray about the decisions we have and pray about where funds go and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm super excited where we're heading 2025. But I know that some nonprofits can be kind of worried about where we're going in 2025, especially with I had someone ask me, what advice would you give to someone who's been working in a nonprofit for a long time and they're starting to get burned out and they're worried going into 2025? And so I kind of wanted to see what you thought of that. I know it's more of a leadership style question. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know what you have to be worried about. 2025 is going to be amazing. It's going to be a fantastic year. And so if you're depressed about this year, I'm like, what are you focusing on? What has got you down? Obviously there's negative things that are always happening in the world, and some of those things will continue. Is to not focus on those things, but to focus on the possibilities of what can happen. But if you're discouraged and you're burned out, then I think it kind of goes back to some of those questions that we asked. There's are you doing the thing in your nonprofit that makes you come alive? And so we can. That's where even with getting the board and getting incorporated and doing all these things, you're adding sometimes unnecessary things by doing them versus hey, let's just do this and then form a board around something that obviously this is working. People are rallying behind this. Now we need this structure in the organization, versus doing it on the front end. So, I would just say, remind yourself of the vision of why you do it. Of the difference that you're making. And that's the thing is if you're working and it's not making a difference, there's no impact. That's when I would, go back to the drawing board and saying, am I supposed to be doing this? But if what you're doing is making a difference, if lives are being changed, impacted, benefited, if you are providing a valuable service for people, then focus on that. And remind yourself of those wins and those stories, because that's why you're doing it. It's to help people. It's to see lives changed, and so it's really easy to focus on the spreadsheets and the budgets and the money and all this. That's not why you do it. You do it for the life change. So you have to remind yourself of the wins and all that God did. And you have to remind your team and those serving with you because they experience that same fatigue. And so if you as the leader or the organization are kind of, worn out and burned out, there's a good chance the people you're serving with are feeling the same thing. So just remind them of the difference that they're making and share those wins, rehearse those wins with them. That's what we do with, all of our volunteers at our church. They'll have, a huddle where they'll kind of get together before and they'll share just a testimony about somebody whose life was changed, and so James is sharing it with the production team of, hey, this person's life was changed. It's because of what you do. We just had this woman who just stopped by the church, very first time coming into the church, but she's been watching online for months, but she had spine surgery, so she wasn't able to come in. And so this woman just with tears in her eyes, thanking us for what the message is, what the church has done for us. And it was because of our production team, because they're the ones that are filming and getting those shots and doing that. So even though you think, oh, who's going to see this? Who's going to care? There's some woman that can't get out to church because she's recovering from surgery who is in tears talking about what it's meant to hurt,
Yeah.
you know? And so that's like, oh yeah, I'll pick up another camera. I'll film another service because they forgot to push the record button on this one, you know? And when you have a strong why and you're actually helping people and serving people and blessing people, then that's when, you know, that's what encourages you and causes you to come alive. So, you know, remind yourself of those victories and don't focus on the defeats or the adversity, you know, or, you know, the people who are coming against you, because it can be easy to focus on that because they're always going to be there. But, you know, there's always more who are for you than against you.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I go to the next question, that just reminded me, like, I had someone join my board that started a nonprofit like a year or two before me. And she was on the board, and every time I had a problem, she's like, oh, I just dealt with this. And so it worked out perfect. And then she started transition, and I was like, would you be interested in being the secretary, which is like paperwork and organization and keeping minutes and crap.
Yeah.
And she has loved it the past few months.
Wow.
Absolutely loved it. And has been killing it. Like, going out of her way to, like, we have a Google Drive, and she just reorganized the whole thing today. And, like, she's absolutely doing amazing. And she was like, I'm so thankful I did this. And it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, she just moved to a different role that she just fits better now.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good to think about, like, if you have someone that's starting to get burned out, see if their gifts fit somewhere else instead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think, you know, Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, I think that's what he talks about is like there's getting the right people on the bus, you know, and then there's getting the people on the right seats in the bus.
Yeah.
And so you might have the right team around you, but they might be in the wrong seat. You might have them in the wrong place. And so just that simple shift and change in what they're doing, and it's like, man, they come alive and get excited about what they're doing or love what they're doing versus hating what they do because they're operating outside of their gifting. And I think that's where most burnout comes from.
Yeah.
You know, it's operating outside your gift. I don't think it's because we're not taking self-care and stuff like that. You know, there was a generation where that was an issue.
Yeah.
But like obviously for the you know, millennials, the Gen Zers, the Gen Alpha, I mean, everybody needs it. I need a mental health day. That wasn't a thing for Gen X. It was like, there's no mental health days. It's like your mom's at work, you're left alone by yourself. You have to make your own dinner. Okay. You got to take care of yourself.
Yep.
And so, so I don't think it's just like, oh, you need to relax more. Like, no, we're binge watching enough TV. We've streamed enough content, but it's I think the burnout that most people are experiencing is from just operating outside of their gifting. You know, when people get in their sweet spot, they really come alive. That
one thing I do when, like, I don't want to sit down and edit, I think back to, I find ultra runners fascinating. And there's a guy named Cam Haynes who's like a bow hunter and ultra runner. And he's always like, he went and left work one night, drove overnight, and got to where he was hunting at sunrise, hunted, and then turned around, packed up the elk, and then drove home to his kids' practice. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Probably not smart, but it's like, this guy's driven. And if he's driven enough to stay awake for 40-something hours, I can probably sit down and edit for 30 minutes.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
It's like these people, Courtney DeWalter's a ultra runner. She's like one of the greatest in the world. And she just did like a 250-mile race and beat world records and ran for like 78 hours without sleeping or something stupid like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, if someone can go do that, running sucks to begin with.
Yeah.
Let alone doing it for that long.
Yeah.
Like,
and for something that makes no difference in anyone's life, just let's run an insane distance that no human being should, just to prove that I could. Like, if you can do that, you can suck it up and edit your video.
You can wake up a little bit earlier.
Yes,
buddy.
you can. Yeah, you can give up a Saturday. You know, you can. You can. You know, you can give up a weeknight to do something that actually matters and is actually making a difference in the lives of others.
For nonprofits that rely on volunteers and donors, how can leaders inspire others to see their role in fulfilling the organization's purpose? I know you talked about when you hire somebody, you're trying to hire a doer that's already doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you would do it, or do you have any more advice for helping people fulfill their purpose within that organization?
I think you touched on it actually. You want to find people who are kind of already doing it, and then you formalize a position, around it. I think that's best. But then sometimes there's just experimentation where it's just moving people around and saying, hey, could you do this? And then you check back in with them, to make sure that, hey, how is that in a role? So whenever we have a new intake and a volunteer and they come into our church, we say, hey, we throw them in this position and they might serve every other week. And so after 6 weeks, it's queued up to where somebody reaches out to them and says, hey, how are you doing in this role? Are you enjoying it? And we give them a couple weeks because sometimes there's like a learning curve where you're still like figuring it out and what's the order of the service and what's the flow and what's all these things. But then once you kind of get in there for a couple weeks, you can get a good feel for it. Like anytime you do something new, it's going to feel overwhelming because everything is new. But then once you get in there, you can ask them after a couple weeks, hey, how are you? Do you like this? And they can be like, I hate it in here. All right, let's move you quickly because we don't want to leave somebody in a role that is not fulfilling. So I would say put them in that position, experiment, see how they do in that role. Like you did with that woman, and she's loving it. So now she's found like her sweet spot, and you would have never known if you hadn't, tried and did that. And so, feel free to experiment and move people around, but don't do it to the point where like they lose their mind. You can, move things around too much, change things so much that you just drive everybody in your organization crazy because they don't know what's happening or who's doing what role, and it creates, confusion.
How do you balance people wearing multiple hats? Like, this isn't a question I had, but I know a lot of your staff personally, and you'll have one guy that does this, and a little bit of this. Like, how do you balance different people doing multiple different jobs?
That's just part of a growing organization. You're always going to have multiple hats that people will have to wear. And I think it's helpful now obviously you're probably asking the wrong person because I'm the one who's given them those roles. You'd be better off asking them like, hey, how are you doing with multiple things? But sometimes, and this is different too because they're paid. For like, they're being paid. Our volunteers, they want to do it. And so if they've signed up for 3 ministries, it's because they want to do 3. We try to talk them out of it. We say, hey, I'd rather have you like focus in on one and become a really high impact leader in this ministry versus you doing all 3. But they're like, I like all 3. All right, have at it. Go for it. But when it comes to our staff, it's that nothing is forever. So we have a staff member, Faye Ellen, who loves missions and outreach and serving the community. But she also does events, and she hates events. But she knows that we know she hates events, and that we are actively looking for somebody who can get that role off of her. And so I have to do this thing that I hate, but I'm like, hey, it's, you do this one thing that you hate, whenever we have an event, and then you get to do what you love the majority of the time. But we need you to hold down this role until we can find somebody who that's their sweet spot. That's what they want to do, and they can step up and do that. So even if they're juggling a role they don't want, is, you letting them know, hey, I know that you don't like this, and this is not forever. And not leaving them in there. We had a woman who's she's the bookkeeper at the church, and she was asked to fill in for a couple months until they found somebody. And it was like 15 years later, she was still in that role. And so a lot of times people will end up leaving an organization because they feel like it's the only way to get out of that role. They still believe in what the organization is doing. They still believe in the mission, but they hate their role, and they feel like they can't say anything. And so the only way out is to quit and leave. And so you definitely don't want to do that to people.
Definitely not. So the last question I have, if you could give one piece of advice to leaders about living with purpose, what would it be?
What do you mean by living with purpose?
So for me, like I work a normal job, as normal as jobs get, typical 9 to 5, but I do this too. And this is where I find my purpose. At work, my purpose is to keep the lights on at the house and feed my family.
Yeah.
But my purpose is much larger doing this. But I know not everybody has the option to, they have something that they're already living with purpose in an area.
Yeah.
But what advice would you give to someone for finding that purpose? Because I know undoubtedly there's people that, have been stuck at the same job for the last 30 years, and that's just what they do,
Yeah.
They wake up and they go to work and they go home and they're looking for a way to kill time outside of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the only answer to that, it has to be a spiritual one, because when you realize that everything you do, it matters to God, not just the stuff that you do that makes a difference in the lives of other people. Jesus, he was a carpenter for, 30 years, obviously outside of his kid age. He was a carpenter. His carpenter business was longer than his ministry.
Yeah.
He only ministered for 3.5 years. He was a carpenter for much longer. And so you got to think, man, when God sent his son, why did he have him working a 9-to-5 job for the majority of his life?
Yep.
And so there has to be something spiritual behind even the mundane things that we do, and understanding that everything we do is for the Lord. Everything we do is an act of worship, in a sense to God, that it has meaning, it has value, that, it doesn't matter how great I preach or how many books I write if my own kids hate me, if I neglect my responsibility to provide for my family. Like, those things matter. I mean, the Bible says, like, hey, you don't like provide for your family. Like, you're worse than an infidel. You're worse than an idol worshiper, because you're not doing the basic things that are required, of you.
Yeah.
And so to understand that, like, you're not just your ministry, you're not just the thing that you do, that all of it matters, and all of it is, connected. And the people who do it full time need to recognize what a gift it is to have a 9-to-5 job that has, they feel like has purpose in it.
Yeah.
I am extremely grateful for that, because I understand that the majority of the people that step through the doors of our church, they go to a job they hate, work for a boss they can't stand, and they're not compensated nearly enough for what they do.
Yeah.
And that's how they live their lives every day. And so, just to say, but like, all of it matters, and none of it is insignificant. That is just as meaningful in the eyes of God as, you filming a documentary and raising money for church planners in Thailand.
Yeah.
That to God, he's not after what you can do for him, and he wants to be involved in all of it.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd want to add as far as path to purpose, other than buy your book?
Buy the book. That's the only thing that I would add. And not just that book, but if you haven't discovered your purpose yet, pick that book up as well. But I think it would be a blessing, and it would help. I write all of my books for people who don't like to read, because I'm not like a big reader. I don't love to read. I love to learn. I don't like to read. And so I write books for people who aren't like avid readers. And so they're short, easy to read books. Most people say, man, I've never finished a book in one day, but I finished your book. And so I try to make them as accessible and easy to read as possible.
I read Feel Free last year, and it was amazing, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So what's your YouTube channel so people can find your content?
Yeah, just Joshua Copron ministry, Joshua Copron. Type my name in there on YouTube. It'll be on there. And all my books are all on Amazon. So if you just type my name, Joshua Copron, on Amazon, it'll pull up a list of all my books.
Sweet. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.